On Monday, she takes a walk with Johnny. On Tuesday, she has a talk with Jim. On Wednesday, she likes to dance with Tommy.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of My Index to Sex. I'm Lynn Ferguson, a big vanilla Scottish woman living in the San Fernando Valley, which is periodically very hot, but rarely in a sexy way. And I'm joined by my pal, Sephe Haven, at one point America's #1 escort. In each episode, Sephe delves into the index box of all of her past clients, and I ask her all the questions everyone wants answered. I'm lying. That's what I should be doing. What I'll actually be doing is assigning the anonymous client on the card a name and, clumsily, trying to understand a world which is completely foreign to me. Anyway, glad you could join us.
On Thursday, she takes a chance with Tim.
So, have you got a card for me then?
I do.
Oh, you do?
I do.
What is it today though? Is it like a letter of the alphabet that I have to guess, or is it somebody who's just weird? Where are we at?
I don't think it's weird. I think what happened.
Just before you start,
Yeah.
what your definition of weird is and my definition of weird is weirdly different. Just
Well, I like when people are different and unusual, and
weird.
I only didn't like it when they were unkind to me, but usually they weren't. You know. No, this card is. I'm going to read it a little bit, but what's interesting about it is not so much what's on the card, but what happened afterwards.
Oh,
So you have to think of a name that's so specific and unusual that
Right.
it wouldn't be heard almost any other time. You know, it could be Mr. Fuddlebunker. I mean, it has to just be a name that if you heard it twice, you'd say, I wonder if they're related.
what about Mr. Twister?
Well, Twister, I'd say do 4 syllables.
Oh, Mr. Twistery? That's 3 syllables. Oh
Sending
my
you back
god!
to school then.
All right, Mr.
It has to be fancy, sort of a Madison Avenue kind of feeling.
Oh, do you know what? I've only ever been to Madison Avenue just to shop. I've never been in a house or anything there. I'm not that fancy. I'm from Cumbernauld. Do you even know me?
That's what it should be, Cumbernauld. Mr.
No, you can't call it I don't want you associating Cumbernauld with sexy time. That would be a first. No,
Give me a good long British Scottish.
oh, Mr. Fancy Blancmange. How about that? I feel like Mr. and Mrs. Fancy Blancmange might live in Madison Avenue, right? So
Right.
Mr. Fancy Blancmange.
Okay. So I shall
Right.
start with the card.
Da-da-da.
Dun, dun, dun. So this gentleman, Mr. Fancy Blancmange.
Yeah.
With my flash accent, Mr. Fancy Blancmange.
I have to say it's better than your Scottish. It is better than your Scottish.
Oh,
just
thank you
the-
very much. Thank you. So this was really simple. I saw him when I first started being independent on my
Right.
own in my own apartment. So I only saw him for 1 hour the first time, which I hadn't established the 2-hour policy yet, and only so it was new.
So who were you at this point? Were you Sasha?
I was still Sasha, but I had just left LA and I just moved to New York and was just starting my own little independent thing, seeing if I could make it work.
Oh, okay.
And I just was kind of running it the same way the agencies used to run it, because that's all I had in terms of knowledge on how to run things. It wasn't until like a couple months later that I was so busy at 1-hour appointments that I couldn't do it. So one of the clients said to me, you should do just 2-hour appointments and make it, a minimum. And I'd say, oh, no, I couldn't do that, because if I did that, people wouldn't see me if I required them to pay for 2 hours. And, and it turned out just fine. Like, the people who were meant to be with me were, and I made twice the money, so it was good. And I got time in between, and it was better. Anyway, so I saw this gentleman first, and this is all I wrote on his card, but this is not really the point of it. I do write that he owns a certain type of business.
A blancmange business.
A blancmange business, oui.
Yes.
But it's very specific. And
It's fancy blancmanges.
You see
Right?
what?
That's why he's got his blancmanges, but not your run-of-the-mill blancmange. Not just any old blancmange. It's a fancy blancmange, and that's why he's called Mr. Fancy Blancmange.
So I wrote in caps, wow, Exclamation point. I don't know if I've ever wrote that. Amazing lover, exclamation point. He was 34 years old at the time.
Wow.
I wrote, he's funny and warm. We have good chemistry, and he's married. And then on the back, I guess I had seen him the first time that 1 hour, and then again a little while later, that also for 1 hour, but he extended into the next hour, so he paid me for an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. And then I must have seen him after I had made the 2 hour minimum. Okay.
Right.
Okie dokie. And that was the 3 times that I saw him. Then I didn't see him. So time goes by. And I get a phone call on my machine. Now I have an ad, and people call my machine and they get this long message of, hi, if you'd like to see me, you have to leave me your name and you're this and you're that, and I'm happy to call you back. And this is the kind of experience I'm having. It was a whole long thing. And if they had the patience to sit through that, and I would call them back and then screen them on the phone. So this gentleman called and left his name, and it was Mr. Fancy Blancmange, but it wasn't the Fancy Blancmange that I knew.
Oh, hello.
So I thought, well, that's a crazy name for it to be repeated. And then when I called him, I always ask, what type of business are you in? Because I'm going to call them back there. That was how we screened to make sure they weren't police. And he told me the type of business, which was the same business as the other Blancmange.
So he was in the Fancy Blancmange business.
Yes, but I thought, that's very weird.
Yeah.
But okay, totally different person. I thought
Could it be a fraud?
I didn't think it was a fraud, but I thought maybe they know each other. Maybe, I don't know. So when he came over, this man, well, the first one was 34 years old.
Yeah.
This man must have been in his early to late 70s and so beautifully put together. This man was so sharp. I mean, like Sean Connery at 80.
Wow.
Just sharp. And he was wearing a 3-piece suit and cufflinks, and just his gray hair was, back. And he was just a beautifully turned out man. But with a potty mouth. Oh my God.
Like Sean Connery then, probably.
Yeah. So he comes over, we start our time together, and he's the first guy, as I said, was very sweet. We had a great chemistry, not at all like this man. It looked like a gentleman, but really quite raucous.
Right.
And he would say things like, I'd like to see you get fucked with another man, and I'd like to see this, and I'd like to see that, and come over here, and so forth. And so I started seeing him, and he was so much fun.
Oh, really?
So much fun. And, brought lovely things to drink, and every so often would invite me out to one of the fancy hotels, and we'd stay for the entire weekend. So this was all good. And then one time he says to me, Sasha, I need to ask you a question, and I want an honest answer. And I was like, oh, okay. And he said, who has a nicer cock, me or my son?
Oh my God.
And I was like, I don't know who you're...
So Mr. Fancy Blancmange was the father, or he was Mr. Fancy Blancmange Sr. And
apparently I didn't know. So I said, I don't know your son. I have no idea, because I'm not going to tell on any of my clients.
Yeah.
And he said, yes, you do. I said, no, I don't. I don't know your son at all. Who's your son? And he told me his name. And I knew that they had the same business. So I thought, oh. And I said, now, why would you think that I would possibly know your son? This is just not true. And he said, first of all, you're lying to me. And I said, no. And he said, well, my son and I work in the same place because it has our name above the door. And I said, okay. And he said, and I saw on a little card in his desk drawer your name and phone number.
Whoa.
And so I didn't know how to, I never admitted to it, ever, because I didn't want to throw his son under the bus, But then he was on this thing about who had a nicer,
What? Nicer attitude? Nicer...
a nicer member.
Oh, a nicer soldier. You're the nicer soldier.
And I said to Mr.
Fancy Blancmange.
Senior, I said, this is a terrible thing. What type of father wants to know about his son's soldier?
Yeah.
And she's like, I want to know. tell me, who's got the nicer one? He said, I haven't seen it since he was a baby. And I'm like, well, you shouldn't be seeing it because that would be weird. But also, and in truth,
Yeah.
it really doesn't matter what the soldiers are like as long as they go to war well,
Oh, I see. Yes. And you're
So-
wearing a uniform. They have to wear a uniform.
Wearing the uniform, yes. And I said, so what would you consider a nicer soldier?
Yeah.
And he said, well, the obvious. And I said, well, I don't. And he said, larger. Is it mine bigger? Do I have a bigger one? I just want to know, is it bigger?
And did he?
He did. So I said, yeah, you do. You have the bigger one. I still didn't admit to knowing the sign, but I just said, yeah, I have the bigger one.
That's a little weird. Did you ever then meet both of them together?
No, it was not. But it was so strange to me that they both had the same taste in at the time. Escorting, in terms of being independent, had just blossomed. So every girl who was going independent was advertising. So there was probably thousands of women at that point. Now there's hundreds of thousands. But at the time, there was tens of thousands that you could see their ad for. So there was a lot of women to choose from. So I just found it so interesting that his son chose me, and then the father chose me. Because
but do you think the father saw the card in the desk drawer and went, oh, hello? Or no, I see. So it wasn't a recommendation. It was like completely...
Yeah, he just saw my card later and went, wow, I think that's my Sasha. And then, of course, the number matched, the phone number. And so I still remember that phone number. So, isn't that weird how you remember your phone numbers?
Yeah, totally. But you can't say it out loud because that's why hackers listen to podcasts, so that they can hack into your bank account.
But also, it's no longer.
Oh, it's no longer. No, but like when you remember those phone numbers, those are the ones you use, allegedly. Yeah.
Well, I don't, but okay. Yeah.
Why did you find out why the son stopped seeing you? Why did that happen?
Well, only thing I could fathom from listening to the older gentleman was I think the son and his wife started having children. And I think he was busy with fatherhood and had stopped the whole escorty side thing. He probably just stopped seeing girls.
Yeah.
Which is probably a good idea when you're becoming...
One would think. When people stop seeing you, does it hurt your feelings?
I thought it would originally, but at the time I was so busy and it was a business.
Yeah.
So a lot of times guys who went to see escorts, they just wanted variety. Sometimes they like you and I would go to a hairdresser and we go, I'm going to keep the same hairdresser if I like her because I don't want to have to go looking around town for a new hairdresser who can do my color. But I think with women, I think they would keep the same girl if they felt safe with her and they liked her. But I also think there was a tendency to, they're playing. They want variety. Why not? So I think there was that, and I had to just know that was the case. Plus, I was friends with other girls who I really liked. So every so often I would hear, oh, I saw Mr. Flagerman or whatever, and I say, oh, yeah.
Not Fancy Blancmange. Other people did. Were the Fancy Blancmanges doing it about town? Or were they just for you?
I never heard of another girl speaking about that. However, I know he saw other women because one weekend he invited me. It was this big snowstorm in New York, but it hadn't hit yet. Mm-hmm. But he invited me to the Peninsula Hotel, and he wanted me to bring a guy who was a working guy.
Right.
So that he could pay the guy, and I would be with him and the guy.
Oh.
Yes. But I didn't want just any guy. So I had a friend, he was at the time a starving writer, and he lived, not in New York. And he used to stay at my apartment when he went to see his agent in New York.
Right.
And so I said, would you want to, do this? And he was like, absolutely, I would,
Had you and this guy ever done anything before?
No. Yes, because here's how I knew him. He started out as a client. He came into town, told me he was a writer, and told me he couldn't afford me because he was a writer. And I said, well, then you shouldn't be seeing me then. Yeah. And he said, we somehow got in a conversation about me wanting to write. And he said, well, how about this? How about you see me for 1 hour and the second hour we talk about your writing and I help you? And I was like, oh God, I don't want to mix mediums,
Yeah.
But I agreed, and I saw him the last person of the evening. And he was so magical. I just adored him so much. And we ended up talking till like 5 a.m. It only paid me for the 1 hour. And we just became really good friends. So, yeah, I got to think of a good name for him. He was originally South African who looked like Robert Redford with long blonde hair.
Oh, that's how.
Really, yeah. He was really smart, really good looking, great sense of humor. He was just very charismatic person.
Carrie. Let's call him Carrie after Cary Grant because he's charismatic, right? So Carrie and Mr. Fancy Blancmange and you.
Yeah, so I said, well, I have somebody, and he's gonna. So we all went over.
Was Carrie not worried about seeing Mr. Fancy Blancmange's bits? And also, considering how obsessed Mr. Fancy Blancmange is with the whole soldier situation, was he interested in seeing Carrie's soldier? And was it like a competition as to who had the best one?
I think he was interested in seeing Carrie's soldier in action
Oh,
with me.
I see.
Like the way that men watch porno films. The guy is only important as the instrument.
As the assistant, yeah, to the lady, yeah.
So, but I think Carrie was a very. He wasn't bisexual, but he was very open-minded and had a fantastic imagination. So, for instance, when I would take him to see couples that I knew, for us, I mean, he was probably 32 and I was, younger a little bit, but the couples were older, which was fine. But for him, being a 32-year-old man, to be with a woman in her early 60s, you would think that there was a thing, except there wasn't. He could find any woman sexy, and he had a great imagination. And I thought, he's a great escort. This is what escorts do.
Yeah.
You should be able to find the sexy in anybody. And he could, which meant that he could always get it up. Which meant, like I told you one time about the guy who couldn't.
Yeah, the one who wanted to do the escorting, and then he turned up, and then he was like, "Oh my god!"
I know.
Did
this guy
Carrie
could.
ever think about then doing like adult films or anything?
No, it's a whole different business.
Is
Just
it
because
really?
just because it's sex work doesn't mean it's the same kind of work. It's not like everybody in IT isn't the same. IT
I
person.
suppose, like, not all chicken restaurants are the same, are they?
That's right.
You get different styles of chicken. You can get the spicy chicken. You can get the chicken wings. You can get I hear you. I understand. Yeah. So we've got you, Mr. Fancy Blancmange, and Carrie in the fancy hotel.
Right. And then it started to snow. And it was snowing.
It's sort of like a sexy white Christmas or something.
It was fantastic. And there was a fireplace. And of course, there was 5 rooms in the hotel. And we had a butler if we wanted him. Not for anything but butlering. But,
That
so
cost extra.
the first night was just us with dinner, from room service and lovely, and talking. And Carrie had a really wonderful South African British accent. I can't do it either, so you do it.
No, I can't do it. And even if I could, I couldn't do it as charismatically as Carrie, the man with the lovely shoulder.
And so also, Mr.
Fancy Blancmange
had a client that's famous, a famous musician that he was on the phone with for a very long time in the other room, while myself and Carrie were in front of the fireplace having wine and just laughing and having a great time. So then we all ended up in the bedroom, and it was my first time with 2 men.
Oh.
Me. And it was, I thought, okay, how am I going to work this out?
Isn't it a bit busy?
That's what I was thinking.
I would feel it was a bit busy. When you go for the Christmas sales or something like that. Like if you go for the sale after Christmas and you're like, no, there's just too many people. Too many people.
Right, I'm going home. This is not my kind of Black Friday.
No, like an IKEA sale or something like that. You go, look at everybody, stop dithering about down there. Move out of the way. I've got things to do.
Dithering, yes. I was afraid there was going to be much dithering.
And was there much dithering or was it?
I was worried. I thought, how am I going to do this? And I was trying to work out the mechanics of it.
Yeah.
Because only one person was going to be below. It wasn't going to be 2 below. So I was like, I'm going to have to be over here, and I'm in a lot of work. But instead, it turned out to be one of the most sensual times I'd had in a long time. So I was laying, and one was on one side of me, and one was on the other, and I was sort of on my side like a sandwich. It was like a me sandwich, and nobody was doing anything but kind of just touching and moving. And to feel, I just closed my eyes and let myself be squished in between two men,
Right.
and kind of, I felt like I was floating in kind of an outer space of madness. So, there was smells, and it was just very sensual. The whole thing was gentle and sensual, and like making out with a guy, and then except you have two. So it
Wow.
was really sexy.
You know, I am full of admiration for you because I honestly, I mean, I've been married for a very long time, and I do have that thing where I'm like, surely one is enough. In fact, more than sufficient.
One is good. This was wonderful. I don't know if I would repeat the experience every day, but it was lovely. The next day, he said, well, I have a surprise for you guys. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so he had invited two escorts over who took a very long time to come over because the cabs were, this was a pileup of snow that we hadn't seen a winter storm like this. So anyways, they got there, and one was very young and one was older than me.
Right.
So it was interesting, and he obviously had relationships with both of them or knew them very well. So that's how I kind of knew that I wasn't the only person that he saw. He had all these other escorts on call. And so we had a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 some,
And how did that work out?
It was, I didn't cross the finish line. I don't know.
Was there a point in the middle of that thing where you're like, okay, I'm here with very little clothing on in a nice hotel in a lovely snowbound place, like kind of getting it on with a group of strangers? Is there a point there? Like sometimes when you're in the middle of an improvisation or something like that, you catch yourself and you go, I wonder if I should just have stayed home to do knitting or something. Did you ever have that thought there? Were you ever like, yeah, or were you off your face in champagne and kind of?
Well, I wasn't off my face, but it was, if you're there, you might as well be there,
Yeah.
So I was there, but it was, every so often you do, not in this instance, but there are times I would think, why can't I just go to a vacation spot and be like other people and take my shoes off and go to the beach? Why is there a list on the refrigerator of what time the next blowjob is? I'm obviously at work.
The thing that goes through my mind doing this series with you is that I suppose before we talked on the series, I'd be like, no, she must be the only person in the world who's got a list on her fridge saying when's the next blowjob. But now, from as you've talked, I'm like, there's probably quite a lot of women and men over the world with a list on their fridge going, oh, God damn it,
I wanted to have a Coke and sit down and put my feet out.
The other thing I wanted to ask about Mr Fancy Blancmange is, was he married? Because he had a son.
He was widowed.
Ah.
By the time I saw him, he was widowed. And for at least 20 years, he was single.
So he didn't want to replace the wife?
No, he was having a blast. And he was actually part of New York society. I just didn't know until later that the whole family was part of the New York society. The people who give charity events and so forth.
The Fancy Blancmange family, were there any more brothers in it? Was there only just one son? Did you know?
No, I don't know. He never talked about. I did know that when he got on the phone at times, he had to take certain calls, and he would talk to really famous people.
Yeah.
Musicians usually, and he supplied, not drugs, but supplied them with his Fancy Blancmange stuff. Because I'm not going to say what business he's in. So he had a lot of really high-profile clientele, and he was kind of trusted around the world. So it was quite interesting. He was really wonderful. The times with him was really nice. The only thing that happened that when the two girls came over, one of the girls was younger and very sweet. She brought with her whole boom box. At the time there was like those big boom boxes you listen to music on. And I always carry my own music, but nowadays, of course, it's, iPods, or but at the time, I think it was those, I don't know, CD players. But she brought this whole big boom box and all of these things in a granny cart, and she was adorable. She was really pretty. She was blonde and sweet. I have no longer any jealousy of the other women. It was gone once I became an escort. Plus, I realized that men did not necessarily stay faithful or choose women based on anything to do with me. So to be jealous of another woman was silly. They chose it to be unfaithful for something inside of them. They chose another woman from something inside of them. It had really nothing to do with the woman traipsing in front of them necessarily.
Wow.
But then I continued to see Mr.
Fancy Blancmange.
But he did invite me to different openings and charity things that they had. And that was quite, and I thought to myself, I have this written down somewhere too, but I remember thinking, when I first started to be an escort, I thought, well, what is that exactly? I mean, didn't know there was sex involved. And so I thought, well, I didn't. They said escorts wanted, no sex involved. I was like, okay, where do we escort them to? And I thought, well, we must escort them to dinner or to a fancy ball. I bet I'll escort men to balls. And it so wasn't that first of all. No.
So escort a man to his own soldier and put on its uniform.
That's right. But then at this point, I was escorting men to balls, and I was like, oh, here we are. Or you look at the other women there and wonder if they were being paid escorts.
Oh, maybe. Maybe.
I have a hard time now, after I finished this business, of when I go anywhere in public, or the racetrack one time I went to, and there was a girl there, and I said to my friend, I said, she's an escort. And she said, how do you know? And I'm like, I just know. She's an escort. And you just know. I just know who's working.
Yeah.
Or same in the hotels if I walk.
Is it because they look a certain way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a certain look.
You've said this person was quite a society. Are they still alive? Is he still alive?
Oh, I would doubt it, because I think when the last time I saw him, he was probably 81. We shared a birthday, which was unusual too.
Wow.
The older Blancmange and I.
The younger Blancmange, no.
The younger Blancmange was a Leo. We did not share birthday. But yeah, the older one and I did, which was interesting too.
What, both the same star sign? Or just on the
date?
day? No.
Yeah. I've had several clients where I actually shared their exact birth date.
Oh, exact birth date? Like, so the same age?
Not the year, but
No, because I was like, you're not old enough to have done the age of Mr Fancy Blancmange younger.
Yeah, so we shared that date. But I remember the last time I saw him, he had turned 81.
Wow.
So I must have seen him for at least 3 or 4 years then.
And what happened the last time you saw him?
The last time it was just the usual, which was wonderful. But what had happened was at that point I was retiring. And so I was kind of wrapping things up. And so probably what happened was I retired and that was it.
Yeah, do you know, it's ironic really, because you're like, he's 81 and he's evidently not retiring.
I know. Well, yeah, I mean, how long? And we have different jobs, so.
Well.
Athletes, models, and escorts, we have to retire at a certain age.
I don't know, though, because you said there was an older lady who was there with a younger girl, right? So she was,
Oh, no, I know. I guess I'm joking about it. Yeah. Well, but there's the business changes as you get older, for sure. I mean, I did retire, but then I was sucked right back in eventually.
Well, we'll leave that for another episode, but this episode has been the story of the Fancy Blancmanges, part 1 and 2, featuring soldiers.
Junior and senior. And Carrie Grant.
She's the sweetheart of 6 other guys.
I think when you talk to most people, they'd say they had a weird family. I thought my dad was weird because he liked to cut the front off of his slippers to let his toes breathe. I mean, I never understood that because toes don't breathe. And anyway, he still wore socks. It just doesn't make any sense. But hearing about the Fancy Blancmanges has completely reframed the definition of weird in terms of parents for me. It's also completely, honestly reframed the idea of a white Christmas. Now it's less deck the halls with boughs of holly and more 5 naked people fidgeting along to the music of an 80s boombox. When I hear Sephe talk about her life, I realise just how much I have no idea of. But I do know I'll find out more on the next episode of
My Index to Sex.
She's the sweetheart of 6 other guys.
You have been listening to My Index to Sex, produced by Ferdal LLC. The music was performed by Chesney Hawkes, and you can learn more about Sephe Haven at sephehaven.com. Go to mitspodcast.com to check out the show notes for more details, including how to stay in touch, give feedback, and ask questions. All the best.
Sunday's my only time with that bozo of mine, 'cause she's the sweetheart of 6 other guys.